What if the greatest crisis in the history of English football wasn't solved by the finest minds of Scotland Yard, but by a four-legged detective who didn't even know what a football was? It is a bizarre, deeply nostalgic riddle that takes us back to a time when the pride of an entire empire rested not on the boots of legendary players, but on the wet nose of a black and white Border Collie mix named Pickles.
March 20th, 1966. Central Hall, Westminster. A heavy, suffocating silence hangs inside the exhibition room. Upstairs, the faint, echoing sounds of a Sunday Methodist church service filter through the ceiling. Downstairs, a security guard finishes his routine 11 o'clock patrol, steps into the display area, and suddenly freezes. His breath catches in his throat. The heavy padlock on the back of the reinforced glass display case has been violently wrenched away. Inside, the velvet-lined cushion is empty. The Jules Rimet trophy, 4 pounds of solid 24-carat gold, the literal holy grail of global sport, is gone. Not a single alarm had been tripped. No one heard a sound. Under the cover of holy hymns, a phantom thief had walked into the heavily guarded heart of the British capital, snatched the most coveted prize in human history, and vanished into the London fog. The host nation was instantly paralysed. The Football Association was utterly humiliated. It was the ultimate British nightmare. They had invited the entire world over for a historic party, and before the guests could even arrive, they had lost the centrepiece. To truly understand the sheer claustrophobic panic that gripped the British establishment in the spring of 1966, you have to understand what football meant to England at that exact moment in time. The swinging 60s were in full, vibrant bloom. The Beatles were dominating the global airwaves, Carnaby Street was the centre of the fashion world, and England was just 4 months away from hosting its very first FIFA World Cup. This wasn't just a sporting tournament, it was a desperately needed national homecoming. England had invented the modern game, codified its rules, and exported it to every corner of the earth. Yet, they had never won its ultimate prize. For decades they had watched from across the English Channel as Uruguay, Italy, and Brazil sculpted the romantic mythology of the World Cup. Now, finally, the world was coming to them. Wembley Stadium's iconic Twin Towers were waiting. The British Empire was fading, but the kingdom of football was supposed to be reclaimed. Instead, they woke up to find themselves an international laughingstock. The Home Office went into immediate overdrive. A special task force of over 100 Scotland Yard detectives was deployed, turning over the London underworld stone by stone. Foreign newspapers were merciless. In South America, journalists openly mocked the English, suggesting that the theft was an insult to the game itself, claiming such a sacrilege could never have happened in Brazil or Uruguay, where the cup was truly loved and properly guarded. The weight of national shame was so heavy it felt physical. The English FA was completely out of its depth, trapped in a nightmare from which they could not wake up. Then the mystery took a dark, sinister turn. A heavy brown package was delivered to the home of FA chairman Joe Mears. When his trembling fingers tore open the wrapping, a piece of the trophy's removable top fell onto his desk. Accompanying it was a chilling ransom note, signed by an anonymous figure calling himself Alba. The demand was clear: £15,000 in unmarked cash, or the solid gold silhouette of Nike, the goddess of victory, would be thrown into a melting pot and turned into anonymous gold bullion. The police attempted a high-stakes cinematic sting operation. An undercover officer named Detective Inspector Buggy met a nervous middleman in a smoky, desolate South London park. The detective carried a briefcase filled with dummy notes, hidden beneath a deceptively thin layer of real cash. A tense, breathless foot chase ensued through the narrow alleyways of London, ending in the violent tackle and arrest of a former dock worker. But the triumph was an illusion. The arrested man was just a petty, low-level thief, a desperate middleman who claimed he had been hired by a mysterious, untouchable mastermind known only as the Pole. He didn't have the trophy. He didn't know where it was hidden. The trail went ice cold. Desperate to avoid a catastrophic international scandal, the FA secretly commissioned a master silversmith to create a perfect replica trophy, praying to God that if England somehow won the tournament, they could swat the fakes in the dark, and no one would ever notice. The British government was preparing for a historic humiliation. They were entirely blind to the fact that, while their greatest detectives were chasing ghosts, the saviour of the tournament was a 4-year-old dog waiting patiently for his evening walk. It was the evening of March 27th, exactly 7 days after the brazen heist. David Corbett, a 26-year-old River Thames lighterman, stepped out of his modest flat in Upper Norwood, South London. It was a perfectly ordinary, mundane British evening. The air was cool and damp, the suburban streets were quiet, and David was simply walking toward a local phone box to see if his new niece had been born yet. Trotting beside him on a tight leash was Pickles. Suddenly, Pickles froze. His ears pricked up. His nose glued itself to the damp grass, sniffing with a sudden, frantic intensity. He began to pull forcefully against his leash, dragging David away from the pavement and toward a neighbour's parked car, right beside a dense, overgrown laurel hedge. Something was buried deep in the dirt beneath the leaves. David looked down, initially annoyed by his dog's stubbornness. But then his eyes caught sight of a tightly bound package resting awkwardly against the front wheel of the car. It was wrapped completely in old, waterlogged sheets of the Daily Mail newspaper, bound tightly, almost aggressively, with coarse string. David knelt in the damp grass, reaching into the darkness of the hedge to pick it up. It was surprisingly heavy. David tore a small, tentative rip in the soggy newspaper. He expected to find a brick, or perhaps a stash of stolen cash from a local bank robbery. Instead, his fingers brushed against a flash of plain, dark wood. He tore a bit more. Gold. Brilliant, shimmering gold glinted underneath the dim glow of the suburban street lamp. He ripped the rest of the paper away, and his heart violently slammed against his ribs. There, sitting on a damp South London pavement, was a small golden woman, holding a cup over her head. Written on the tiny plaques on the base were 3 unmistakable words: Germany, Uruguay, Brazil. David was paralyzed, with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. With the theft dominating every headline on Earth, his first thought wasn't glory. It was that he was holding an unexploded bomb, or that he was being set up by dangerous criminals. He frantically wrapped the trophy back up, scooped Pickles up under his arm, and sprinted through the dark, all the way to the Gypsy Hill police station. When David slammed the soggy package onto the front desk, the desk sergeant didn't even look up, dryly muttering, "Doesn't look very gold to me, son." But as David insisted, the officer reluctantly scraped a tiny pocket knife across the base, revealing the brilliant, unmistakable 24-carat glow beneath. The station erupted into absolute chaos. Yet the fairy tale didn't begin immediately. In the cynical, high-pressure world of Scotland Yard, The story seemed far too convenient. For weeks, David Corbett was treated not as a national hero, but as prime suspect number one. He was subjected to grueling, multi-hour interrogations, his personal life examined under a brutal microscope. But Pickles had no criminal record. Pickles was entirely innocent. And eventually, the police had to accept the miraculous truth. A suburban family dog had accomplished in 60 seconds what the entire British state could not achieve in a week. Overnight, the narrative flipped from national shame into a whimsical, beautiful fairy tale. Pickles became a global icon. He was the guest of honour on international television shows, was awarded the Silver Medal of the National Canine Defence League, and received a lifetime supply of premium food. The reward money of £6,000 completely transformed the Corbett family's life, allowing them to buy their very first home. But the true eternal climax of Pickles' mythology occurred on July 30th, 1966. Bobby Moore led England to a historic, heart-stopping victory over West Germany at a roaring Wembley Stadium. That night, at the official, ultra-exclusive celebration banquet at the Royal Garden Hotel in Kensington, the newly crowned world champions stood on the balcony, looking down at the adoring crowds. And right there beside them, invited as an official guest of honour, was Pickles. Bobby Moore looked down at the little black and white dog and smiled, raising his glass in a silent toast. Later that evening, Pickles was allowed to do what no other creature on earth could. He proudly licked the dinner plates of the greatest footballers England had ever produced. Pickles passed away just a year later, but his legacy remains permanently written in gold. Football didn't just come home in 1966 because of tactical genius or historic hat-tricks. It came home because an ordinary man took an ordinary walk on an ordinary night with an extraordinarily curious dog who saved the beautiful game.